Welcome back. With another huge budget deficit to deal with, Governor Malloy plans to recalculate how state financial aid is doled out to cities and towns.
The responsible way to do that is by setting priorities and allocating our resources where they are needed most. Because the truth is, we simply can't afford to continue doing everything we've done in the past.
Last month, the governor's budget office announced a $50 million cut. $50 million in state aid, $20 million of that for education.
And as you can imagine, with that cut coming in midway through a school year, it set off alarm bells everywhere. Joining us to talk about this development are Dr. Joseph Cirasuolo, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, and we also have attorney Patrice McCarthy, Deputy Director and General Counsel for the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education. Thank you both so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So where do all the towns and cities with respect to education stand at this point in the school year?
There's a great deal of uncertainty. The $20 million cut midway through a year raises all sorts of alarms, but not only for this year. The governor's statements claim that next year may be worse, in fact will be worse. And so what we're seeing as school boards put their budgets together, there are a lot of things they would have done for kids next year that they're not going to be able to do and are not even going to plan to do. And some of the things they're doing now, they won't be able to do. Some places are actually thinking about cutting back all-day kindergarten. We had a lot of them go in a few years ago, and some places are saying, you know, if we have to go somewhere, we're not mandated to have an all-day kindergarten, we'll go back to half-day. This kind of thing is going to really impact the education we offer children. And if we have to live with it, fine, but I think people need to be clear about the price we're going to pay in terms of the education for children in this state.
These cuts are happening midway through this school year. Are you hearing from districts that are going back and taking money away for this school year, or are they looking to next school year?
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
The biggest impact will be next school year. They're halfway through the year now. There's not much you can do with a budget halfway through the year,
right,
unless you're going to start laying people off.
Yeah, what about that?
Well, I think in most places they are trying to get through the year without doing that. I mean, I think it's a work in progress. But the biggest concern is what's going to happen in next school year, the school year after that. The combination of these three things together is really having a very negative effect.
And this reallocation, Patrice, of the way the formula is calculated to provide education cost sharing, what concerns do you have about that?
Well, obviously, we'll have to wait until early February when we see the proposal that the governor is putting forward. But clearly, given the number of state requirements on public education, it's imperative that every child in Connecticut receives some state support for their education. Every district has students with extraordinary special education needs. That takes a big dent in the local education budget. And the other thing we're seeing is, as we try and provide services to help close the achievement gap, those are some of the very things that might not be addressed going forward. Districts are looking at cutting guidance counselors, at eliminating programs that support developing numeracy and literacy skills. Those are all critical, especially for students who don't necessarily enter school with a lot of those experiences in their home.
This is going to create a lot of tension because some of the inner city schools are going to look at this and be, happy about a formula where they'll get more, and some of the suburban schools are not going to be happy because they're getting their funding cut. Are you already hearing from people on both sides of that?
Well, I'm not sure that the urban folks think they're going to get more. I think they're going to get less of a cut. So I think there's concern across the board. And when you're cutting urban systems, you're dealing with children who have a lot of needs. So even small cuts there have an impact. I want to reiterate something that Patrice said. A lot of these cuts are going to be in areas that are now preventing kids from becoming special ed. We're able to intervene, get them going and learning. We don't have to do something extraordinary. Remove those supports, and these kids are going to start qualifying for special ed. Now you have a much more expensive proposition to deal with. Not to speak about the maintenance that's going to be deferred, and that's going to be a much more expensive proposition down the road. Again, if we have to live with this, fine, but let's be clear about what we're living with.
And not to overlook the fact that there's a Supreme Court case right now on special education out there in Colorado, where the result of that could determine that there's a even greater obligation than there is now for special education funding.
That's true. And we also have a court case in Connecticut that hasn't been resolved. And that probably won't, I think, Patrice, you've got some information on that.
It's unlikely that the Connecticut Supreme Court will hear the oral arguments before next fall. So it will still be probably over a year before we have a decision.
This is the case involving Judge McCarthy?
That's correct. CJEF versus Rel.
Yes. Well, all right. So where do we go from here? What do you need to know?
Well, I think one of the things we need to have, if we're going to end up with less money, we need to have some mandate relief, because there are a lot of things we're spending money on now.
Mandates like what?
Well, we have, for example, every year we have to train everybody in the school on how to break up a fight. Now, most people go through their careers and never have to break up a fight. Quite frankly, when I was an administrator, there were people on my staff, I didn't want to have them break up a fight. We don't need to do that with everybody in the school every year. And there are a whole bunch of other mandates. Patrice was on a task force that dealt with the professional development mandates.
Yeah, tell us about that. That actually, you found unfunded mandates that you were saying that everyone agreed on were not needed or not necessary?
We did. Last year, the legislature set up a task force specifically to look at the professional development mandates, because those have been added to over the years. And we are now moving to support for educators that is much more personalized, focused on supporting them in addressing student achievement. And the amount of time that's being spent fulfilling all of these specific statutory mandates eats up every minute of professional development time. So the task force met every other week over the course of 4 or 5 months, and came up with some very specific proposals that were delivered to the legislature last week. And that task force included representatives from the teachers' unions, principals, superintendents, and boards, and we all came to consensus about this approach. So we're optimistic that since the legislature charged us with this responsibility of coming back with recommendations, that those will be taken up during this legislative session.
Yeah, how's the reception been? Have you actually spoken with lawmakers that have given positive feedback about it?
Absolutely. They're looking forward to looking at this carefully, and I would certainly expect that that will be one of the issues that has a public hearing.
And of course, what people sitting at home are wondering about, okay, if education is cut and these things have to be done, how much are my taxes going to go up?
Well, that's going to be a real discussion that's going to take place in every community in the state. And I don't sense, nobody senses a great deal of willingness at the local level to raise taxes. So I think we're going to end up with program cuts. We're going to get, the things we've talked about are going to happen. And part of the problem with this is, and if we look long term on it a little bit, the report came out about, I think a month ago, that said one of the things that makes Connecticut attractive to businesses is an educated workforce. That didn't happen by accident. That's hard work done by school boards, administrators, teachers. You start cutting back on that, you're going to compromise that work. If we become less attractive to businesses, we now have less revenue in the future, and this thing becomes a cycle that you can't get out of.
Yeah. And, you know, people are looking at this and they're saying, well, look, something has to be cut somewhere, but every other interest is saying, well, don't cut me, this is more important, or don't cut me, this is more important.
Well, we're saying something a little bit different than that. We're saying, look, we're not going to second guess the governor and the legislature on what they can afford. They've got that job to do. It's a tough job to figure out. All we're saying is these are the consequences. Keep that in mind when you make your decisions, and treat us as well as you can. But don't tell us afterwards that we gave you less money and you can still do everything that you were doing before. That just can't happen, and we need to be real about that.
Got to ask you, 169 different municipalities, obviously, in Connecticut. Is there discussion about regionalization of certain services, or going in and trying to figure out how to combine costs with other towns, whether it's healthcare or anything like that?
Absolutely, and a lot of that work has been going on for a number of years. Districts, sometimes they combine services with their municipal government, and many times they combine particularly what we call back office services with other school boards. Our regional educational service centers around the state often help coordinate that on behalf of the local boards, and they have found real savings going out to purchase supplies, having human resources services shared among districts. Those are all real cost savings. It still allows a community to have their public schools, but what's being taken care of on a regional or a cooperative basis, the members of the community don't even see it. It's the behind the scenes pieces.
So what do you want people watching this to do about this situation?
We want them to pay attention to what the consequences are going to be, and then decide for themselves what they should say to their own representatives. If they're okay with the consequences, then fine. But if not, they ought to be saying to their representatives, try and preserve as much funding for public education as you can so that the situation is not as bad as it could be. We all realize we're in a fiscally difficult situation, but I think people need to really make themselves aware of. What I would suggest is they talk to their own school district, speak to the superintendent, speak to the Board of Education, get from them what the consequences are going to be in their community, and then act on that information.
How real is the possibility of layoffs? I know we spoke on that before, but
I think it's very real. We certainly know that in preparing their budget, Hartford is already looking at significant layoffs. I think we're going to see that around the state as boards go through the budget process in the next 2 or 3 months. And that impacts class size, that impacts the ability to provide individualized instruction and really focus on student learning needs. And that's going to compromise our ability to close the achievement gap.
Okay, well, Patrice and Dr. Cirasuolo, thank you very, very much, both of you, from the boards of education and from the superintendent's viewpoint, for laying it out for us.
Thank you.
really appreciate it.
It's good to talk to you.
Yep.
As always.
All right, will Connecticut lawmakers approve a third casino not on tribal lands? Well, we don't know the answer to that quite yet, but if they do, we know it's not going to be built on the old movie theater site in East Hartford, unless the developer convinces the tribes to put his project back in the running. His story and some other news in a moment.